I stepped out of my house and froze. Bulldozers were tearing up the land, my land. I ran over, demanding answers. The workers barely glanced at me before one of them muttered, "The HOA owns this property now." My heart sank. This wasn't just a mistake. Someone had taken what was mine. My name is Emily, and what happened to me should never have happened. A few months ago, I inherited a piece of land from my late grandfather. A beautiful, quiet stretch of property he had worked hard for his entire life. I remember walking through it, imagining all the memories he'd made there. But barely. A week after I moved in, I noticed something strange. Workers started showing up. I thought it was just routine maintenance or maybe a new neighbor moving in, but the closer I looked, the more unsettled I became. They were constructing something, a playground right in the middle of what was supposed to be my private property. I approached the construction manager, thinking it was a mistake. But when he casually mentioned that the HOA had authorized this, I knew something was terribly wrong. The shock was only the beginning. I went straight to the HOA office, my frustration building with every step. When I walked in, I was met by a woman in her 50s, sharp as a tack, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She introduced herself as Karen, the HOA president. I didn't waste time. "Why is there a playground being built on my land without my permission?" I demanded. Her smile tightened as she looked at me, almost condescendingly. "Oh, we've had this property for over a year now." "You must have misunderstood something," she said, as if she were dismissing a child. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I knew that wasn't possible. My grandfather's will was clear, and the deed was in my name. "I'm not mistaken," I snapped. "I've been living here for weeks. You can't just come in and claim this land without any warning." She stood up slowly, her fingers tapping on the desk in a deliberate rhythm. "You're not seeing the bigger picture here, Emily. The HOA has plans for the community. A playground is just the beginning." She spoke with the kind of authority that made my blood boil. "If you don't like it, you can take it up with our lawyers." I felt my stomach drop. It was clear that Karen didn't care about my rights. She had the power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. I was just a nuisance to her, a small piece of the puzzle. But this wasn't just about a playground anymore. It was about something bigger. The HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them bulldoze over me, no matter how much power they had. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to fight back. I spent hours digging through the stacks of old papers in my grandfather's office, searching for something, anything, that could prove the land was mine. But it wasn't until I noticed an old metal box hidden beneath his desk, covered with dust and cobwebs, that I thought I might be onto something. It wasn't much bigger than a shoebox, but the weight of it felt odd, like it was hiding something important. When I opened it, the faint smell of old paper hit me, and inside, I found several faded documents. Most were old receipts and letters, but one piece of paper stood out. It was the original 1910 land survey, yellowed and creased with age, but still legible. I took a deep breath and spread it out on the desk. My hands trembled as I traced the map with my finger, trying to make sense of it. The boundaries on the map didn't match what the county records had shown. According to this survey, my property extended 80 acres farther than what was officially recorded, right into the area where the playground was being built. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just building on land they didn't own. They were building on land that had been stolen from me and my family. This was my birthright, my grandfather's legacy, and they had taken it without hesitation. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could the county have missed this? Had Karen and the HOA known about this all along, or had they been duped by whoever sold them the land? Either way, it was clear. They had no legal right to it, and now I had the evidence to prove it. I sat there for a few moments, processing what I had just discovered. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about a playground anymore. This was a matter of fraud, of someone trying to erase my family's history. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else get away with it. I folded the survey carefully and tucked it into my bag. This was the weapon I needed, the proof that the HOA was in the wrong. But I knew it wasn't enough to just have the document. I had to act. I couldn't wait around for someone to take me seriously. I needed to confront them, to bring the truth to light. So, I made a decision in that moment. I was going to fight back, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one who was silenced. With the land survey in hand, I knew I needed more to build my case. This wasn't just about a mistake or misunderstanding anymore. Something far deeper was going on. So I started digging, not just through records but through conversations, trying to find out who else was involved in this scheme. I spoke with the neighbors, some who had lived there for decades, others who had moved in recently. Most were hesitant to talk, but a few had seen things they weren't willing to ignore. One woman, Mrs. Thompson, had lived next door to my grandfather's farm for over 30 years. Her face was drawn and wary, but when I mentioned the playground, her eyes darkened. "You think that's bad?" she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You don't know the half of it. The HOA's been in on this. For years, they've been buying up land, changing zoning laws, and selling to developers under the table. It's all connected." She mentioned a few names, local developers, a handful of shady LLCs, but the name that stood out to me the most was Diane Reynolds, the HOA president. When I dug deeper, I found her name tied to 6 different companies that were involved in the development, all of them tied back to the same group of investors. Karen wasn't just the HOA president, she was a major player in a massive land grab operation. And this wasn't just a local issue, it was bigger than I'd realized. I started going through the property records at the county office. For hours, I pored over deeds, permits, and zoning applications. It didn't take long before I started to see a disturbing pattern. Many of the properties in the area had been sold off by the HOA at suspiciously low prices, and the buyers were always companies tied directly to Diane and her associates. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep this corruption ran. They weren't just taking my land, they were systematically seizing control of the entire neighborhood, selling it off to the highest bidder, and profiting off the destruction of our community. But it didn't stop there. As I dug through business registrations, I discovered that several of these LLCs had no real employees, no physical addresses, and barely any online presence. They existed only on paper, created to funnel money into Diane's pockets. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a case of greed. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to crush anyone who stood in their way. My hands shook as I sifted through the final batch of documents, realizing the magnitude of what I was dealing with. If I didn't act fast, everything, the land, the community, the truth, could be lost forever. The corruption was deeper than I had ever imagined, and now I had the evidence to prove it. It was time to take the next step, no matter what. It cost me. Just when I thought I had a solid case, everything started to fall apart. I had the documents, I had the evidence. But what I didn't expect was how far they'd go to shut me down. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. Little things that I brushed off as coincidences. My mail was late, sometimes disappeared entirely. Then, I found a mysterious letter on my doorstep from the HOA, an official warning for unauthorized use of land. I wasn't even sure what they meant by that, but it felt like a threat. I was starting to realize that they weren't just trying to take my land. They were trying to break me, make me too scared to fight back. But things escalated quickly. One morning, I woke up to a surprise, concrete barriers blocking my driveway. I tried to back out, but they'd locked it all off. The note on the barrier read, "Trespassing on private property." They were trying to intimidate me, make it impossible for me to get in or out of my own home. I called the police, but they didn't show up until hours later, by which point the damage had already been done. The next day, I found a pile of notices at my front door, 12 code violations slapped on my property. They were citing me for everything from improper drainage to structural damages that didn't exist. I knew they were using the violations as a way to force me to give up. They didn't even bother with making sense. They were throwing anything they could at me, hoping I'd back down. That wasn't even the worst part. A few days later, my water was suddenly shut off. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. When I called the utility company, they claimed it was an administrative issue, but couldn't explain why my house was the only one affected. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just petty retaliation. It was a full-blown attempt to break me. Everywhere I turned, they were trying to trap me, to make me feel cornered. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't go to the police without risking being hit with more fines. I couldn't even get a simple repair done without being accused of violating some code. The more I fought, the more the walls closed in. It felt like I was up against a system that had already decided my fate. My land, my home, everything was at risk. And yet, I wasn't going to back down. I knew that if I didn't fight, I'd lose it all. This wasn't just a fight for land. This was a fight for my right to stand up against the people trying to crush me. The deeper I went, the more I realized. They were powerful, and they were willing to do whatever it took to win. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The town hall was packed. Everyone was there. The HOA members, developers, even the local press. It felt like the whole town had come to watch. I could see the tension in the room, the whispers, the stares. Diane was sitting up front, her usual confident, smug expression plastered across her face. She thought she'd won. She thought I was just another obstacle that would fade away, but this was my moment. I walked to the front slowly, keeping my eyes locked on Diane. My heart pounded in my chest. The weight of the situation was heavy, but I wasn't going to let fear take over. As I stood at the podium, I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Silence. "Diane," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "You think you've won. You think you can just take what isn't yours. But you've forgotten something." I pulled out the documents, the land survey, the original deeds, the evidence that had been buried for so long. I unfolded it slowly, the paper crackling in the silence. The room was tense, everyone waiting for me to speak again. I glanced at Diane, watching her eyes widen, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "You built your homes, including yours, on land that's mine. This survey dated from 1910 proves it. My grandfather's property goes 80 acres further than what you have on your records. All of this, was never yours to take." The room went completely still. You could hear a pin drop. People exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Diane stood frozen, her eyes darting around, looking for a way out. But there was no escape. Her facade was crumbling in front of everyone. I took a deep breath, continuing. "You can't just buy a piece of land and erase history. You can't just come in and take something that belongs to someone else, not without consequences." I could feel the weight of my words in the air, and it was more than just the fight for land. This was about standing up to someone who thought they could bully their way through life. Diane's face was pale now. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was like the power had shifted, the tables had turned, and in that moment, I knew I had won. The town hall erupted. People stood, clapping, some shouting in support. Diane's supporters were silent, unable to refute the truth I had just laid bare. The mayor spoke up, his voice firm. "We will review the documents and begin an investigation into the legality of this development. No one is above the law." I could feel the flood of relief wash over me. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was the moment everything changed. Diane was no longer in control. The truth had come to light, and there was no turning back. I'd fought for what was mine, and I wasn't backing down now. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The town hall decision was just the beginning, but it was a huge step toward justice. Diane and her cronies were forced to back off, their plans stalling as the investigation into the illegal land grab began. But it wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and showing that people like Diane couldn't get away with exploiting the system. At first, things were tense. The town was divided, but I never lost sight of my goal. I knew this wasn't just about me or my family. It was about standing up for what's right, for preserving the legacy of those who came before me, and for ensuring the land was protected for future generations. Over the next month, I gathered support from the community. I reached out to neighbors, landowners, and even people who had been watching from the sidelines, afraid to speak up. It wasn't easy. Some were still loyal to Diane, still afraid of what would happen if they spoke out. But slowly, the tide began to turn. People realized that what was happening wasn't just a fight for one piece of land. It was a fight for fairness, for transparency, for the future of the community. The most significant change came when we decided to take the high road. Instead of waging a war that would tear the town apart, we worked with the city council to form a new HOA, one that was transparent, with fair rules and equal opportunities for everyone. It wasn't just about making sure my land was safe. It was about making sure everyone had a voice, that no one could come in and take what wasn't theirs without consequences. I worked with a few trusted people, bringing together a group of like-minded individuals who wanted to see real change. We rewrote the HOA's charter, adding clauses for fair development, community input, and most importantly, a requirement for all transactions to be open to public scrutiny. The new HOA was based on integrity, no hidden agendas, no backroom deals, no taking advantage of the weak. It was about building a community, not a corporation. As for Diane, her influence crumbled. The investigation exposed her connections to shady businesses, and soon enough she was ousted from her position. It wasn't just about winning against her. It was about the fact that the community had finally woken up to the kind of person she was. The power she once held evaporated, and with it, her control over the town. She was left with nothing but the mess she'd tried to create, a mess that was now being cleaned up piece by piece. But I wasn't looking for revenge. Instead, I focused on the bigger picture. The new HOA began to thrive. The property values in the area stabilized, and the development project that had been on the verge of tearing the community apart was put on hold indefinitely. The land, including my grandfather's farm, was protected once again, safe from developers who only cared about making a quick profit. Over time, the changes became undeniable. Families who had once felt marginalized by the old system now had a voice. The community rallied around the new HOA, sharing ideas and creating a space where everyone felt welcome. The power imbalance that had existed before was gone, and with it, a sense of unity began to flourish. As I stood in the middle of the farm one evening, I looked around at what we had accomplished. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the fields that my grandfather had once worked. I could almost hear his voice in the wind, telling me how proud he would have been of what we'd done. We hadn't just protected the land, we'd protected the values that mattered most. I didn't kick anyone out. Instead, we built something better. We created a community that valued fairness, transparency, and respect. We gave people the power to stand up for themselves, to be heard, and to make a difference. It wasn't just about winning a court case or taking down a corrupt leader. It was about showing that even in the face of adversity, people could come together and make things right. Grandpa's land was safe again, but more importantly, so was the future of our community. We had set a precedent for what it meant to do the right thing, no matter how hard it might seem. And that, I realized, was the true victory. Just when I thought everything was settled, I received a mysterious letter in the mail. Not from Diane, but from someone far more powerful. The letter was short, cryptic, and chilling. "We know what you did. This isn't over." My heart sank. It was clear that someone, somewhere, had more plans for this land. And for me. Who could it be? What did they want? I couldn't help but wonder. What would you do if your fight wasn't over, but just beginning? Drop your thoughts below, and if you're curious to see what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next twist in this saga. And hey, if this story has you hooked, give it a like, because the battle's only just begun.